Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, a weathered cabin stood like a scar against the earth, isolated, collapsing, yet somehow still breathing. Inside those walls lived generations of men bound not by choice, but by blood. Brothers born of brothers, sons of uncles, grandsons of fathers, a line that folded inward until the name itself became a curse. Locals whispered of strange men wandering barefoot through the mud, eyes vacant, voices broken. They called them the men who slept together. It wasn't an insult. It was a warning. What began as survival twisted into something unrecognizable, a male bloodline so entangled, so isolated, that it ceased to resemble what we call human. And when outsiders finally dared to step inside, what they found was not just decay, but the remains of what happens when man turns entirely inward. This is not fiction. It's the story of the most inbred clan of men ever known, and every word of it is true. Before we open the door to that cabin, take a second to like this video. If stories about lost brotherhoods, hidden truths, and the darkest corners of masculinity fascinate you, subscribe and hit the bell. What's coming next will stay with you. The house sat in the middle of a hollow where the sun arrived late and left early. Every board was warped, every nail rusted, yet somehow it refused to fall. Men had lived there for generations, bound by blood and burden. They were brothers, fathers, uncles, and sons. No outsiders, no visitors. Time moved differently around them, slow and heavy, as if waiting for something to end. Locals said the land itself was cursed. They claimed the air around that cabin was thick with silence, the kind that made even the bravest hunter hesitate before stepping closer. The first of the line had come seeking refuge from a world that had forgotten him. His sons never left, and their sons followed, until the name itself became a whisper of warning. Those who crossed the ridge at dusk spoke of strange sounds drifting from the trees. Low murmurs, broken laughs, voices that didn't seem to belong to any living man. Inside the cabin, the air was stale with smoke and sweat. Wooden beams sagged overhead, and the walls were covered in carvings, initials, symbols, marks of men who refused to be forgotten. They lived without clocks, calendars, or mirrors. Days bled together, seasons shifted without announcement. To them, time was not a line. It was a circle, closing tighter with every generation. The eldest among them, a man called Elias, carried the memory of all that came before. He rarely spoke, his eyes clouded by age and something far heavier than wisdom. Each morning, Elias would sit by the fire and whisper the same words, "We stay because we must." No one ever asked him why. The younger men simply nodded, afraid of the answer. The men worked the land, though it offered little. The soil was thin, the crops stunted. Still, they toiled from dawn until dusk, their hands cracked, their backs bent beneath invisible weight. At night, they gathered around the same table, rough wood, uneven legs, stained by decades of use. No laughter filled the room, only the scrape of spoons and the creak of the floorboards beneath them. They did not pray, yet they lived as if watched. Each movement, each breath, carried the unease of men aware of something unseen waiting beyond the edge of the firelight. A younger man named Jonah often stared into the woods, searching for shapes that weren't there. He said he heard voices, men calling his name from deep within the trees. The others warned him to ignore it. "The forest remembers," Elias told him, "and it doesn't like to be called." But curiosity gnawed at Jonah until silence felt more dangerous than sound. One evening, he left the cabin after dark. The others waited, listening. Hours passed before footsteps returned, slow, dragging, uneven. Jonah entered with wide eyes and trembling hands, but spoke no word of what he'd seen. After that night, he stopped speaking altogether. The men watched him sit by the window, staring at the same patch of darkness, lips moving soundlessly as if answering questions no one else could hear. The silence thickened after Jonah's change. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter, as if afraid to draw attention. The men avoided the woods, avoided conversation, avoided mirrors that might show what they were becoming. When storms rolled through the valley, the roof trembled but held. Rain bled through the ceiling in thin lines that traced paths across the dirt floor. Each drop felt like a ticking clock, counting backward. They buried their dead behind the cabin, under stones marked only with initials. No man ever left the ridge, not even in death. Their world began and ended within the same patch of ground. One winter, the youngest, barely a man, fell ill. No one knew the cause. Fever burned through him for 7 nights, and when it broke, his eyes looked older than Elias's. He didn't speak again. Elias said it was the mark of the bloodline, the curse that came from staying too long in one place. "Men aren't meant to rot together," he whispered, "but we've forgotten how to leave." Outside, help never came. The roads were too far, and the neighbors too wary. Rumors kept outsiders away, tales of madness and disease. The men were alone, left to carry their history in silence. In time, the walls themselves began to echo. Late at night, when the fire burned low, faint knocks came from within the wood like memories trying to escape. The men learned not to listen. Jonah's condition worsened. He wandered the halls at night, humming to himself, tapping his fingers against the walls in patterns that almost resembled language. The others followed him with fear, not pity. Once, Elias tried to stop him. He placed a hand on Jonah's shoulder, but Jonah recoiled, eyes filled with something between terror and recognition. "You can't stop it," he whispered. "It's already inside." After that, Jonah disappeared. No one searched. They simply nailed the door shut to the room he'd slept in. The air grew heavier, the silence deeper, as if the house itself had taken a breath. Weeks passed. The men spoke even less. When one of them died, they didn't dig fresh graves anymore. They covered the bodies in dirt beside the fire, whispering apologies to the land. The cabin smelled of rot and smoke. Mice moved freely across the floor. Yet none of the men complained. They seemed more afraid of the outside world than of the decay closing in around them. Sometimes they saw shapes through the windows, men who looked exactly like them, standing still among the trees. The figures never approached, only watched until the firelight flickered, then vanished into the night. Elias claimed they were echoes, remnants of the bloodline, waiting for the last man to fall so the circle could close. "They are what we left behind," he said, "or what will become." Snow arrived early that year, swallowing the ridge in white silence. The men burned furniture to stay warm. The fire flickered weakly, painting the room in trembling shades of red and shadow. By then, only a few remained. They stopped keeping count of days. Their faces blurred into one another, and their voices lost distinction. They were no longer individuals, just the last echoes of a fading name. Elias was the final to speak, his voice barely more than breath. "When the fire dies, let it." No one answered. They watched the flames shrink until darkness filled every corner of the room. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, carrying faint whispers that might have been words or memories. The house creaked once, then settled into silence, its walls exhaling centuries of exhaustion. When spring returned, the cabin still stood. Empty. Windows shattered, door hanging loose. But sometimes men passing through the woods claimed to hear soft murmurs rising from within. Voices repeating a single phrase. "We stayed because we must. The land remains untouched, avoided even by animals. Grass refuses to grow near the graves, and the air smells faintly of smoke no one has lit in years." Time forgot the men, but not their silence. Those who listen long enough swear they can hear footsteps circling the cabin at night, steady and patient. The men may have vanished, but something still walks the ridge, bound forever to the curse of remembrance. The legend endures as a warning whispered through the hills, not of ghosts or monsters, but of men who stayed too long in one place until even the earth forgot how to let them go. And somewhere, deep beneath the soil, the last embers of their fire still glow faintly, waiting, remembering. The house that time forgot, and the men who could not leave it behind. The cabin had survived another winter, though the men inside barely had. The walls leaned inward as if listening, and every whisper seemed to echo longer than it should have. Outside, fog crawled through the valley like a living thing. It clung to the trees, to the graves, to the brittle fence posts that marked the edge of their forgotten world. Elias had vanished months ago, leaving behind nothing but his chair by the fire. The others never spoke of him. Some said he'd gone into the woods. Others believed he never truly left. Jonah was gone, too, but his voice remained. At night, a soft hum drifted through the cabin, low, steady, unmistakably human. The men told themselves it was the wind. None of them believed it. The youngest, Samuel, began recording what he heard. He scratched marks into the wall, lines that grew uneven over time, like his memory of the days themselves. The walls became his only audience. Every morning he'd wake before the others, stand outside, and stare into the fog. Sometimes he swore he saw shapes, broad shoulders, bowed heads, moving slowly, silently, as though carrying invisible burdens. The men rarely spoke anymore. When they did, their words felt foreign, heavy in the air. Speech had become something dangerous, something that could draw attention from whatever listened beyond. One night, as the fire dimmed, an unfamiliar knock came from the door. Not urgent, just deliberate, 3 slow raps that vibrated through the boards and settled in their bones. No one moved. The knock came again, softer this time. The eldest among them, Marcus, rose from his stool, his eyes hollow but steady. "It's only the wind," he said, though no wind knocked like that. He opened the door and found nothing but the night. The fog pressed close, thick as wool, muffling even the sound of his breath. Then, faintly, came a whisper. "We hear you." Marcus slammed the door shut, bolting it with trembling hands. The others pretended not to notice his face drained of color, his lips moving without words. The fire hissed, and silence reclaimed the room. By morning, the fog had thickened. It hung low and gray, swallowing sound, blurring edges. The men could barely see the graves behind the cabin. It was as if the world had folded in on itself. That day, Samuel disappeared. His boots sat neatly by the door, his coat still on its peg. Only his marks remained on the wall, dozens of lines, ending abruptly mid-scratch. The men searched half-heartedly. They called his name until the forest swallowed the sound. When night fell, they heard footsteps circling the cabin, slow and deliberate, never straying far. Marcus sat by the door, axe in hand, though even he knew it wouldn't help. "He's not gone," he muttered. "He's joined them." No one asked who "them" was. They already knew. Sleep became impossible. The hum returned, louder now, weaving through the floorboards, the rafters, their dreams. It sounded almost like a song, almost familiar, until it turned into a laugh. By the third night, the laughter stopped. In its place came a single phrase whispered over and over, "Still here." The men pressed their hands against their ears, but the words crawled beneath the skin. One morning, the youngest left tried to run. He made it to the clearing before collapsing, gasping, staring upward as if seeing something none of the others could. His eyes stayed open long after his breath stopped. The others buried him at dusk, saying nothing. Marcus marked the grave with a stone, and a single word scratched into it. "Listened." Then he turned and walked back inside, never looking up again. The days blurred after that. The food dwindled. The air grew damp and sour. The men barely noticed when the roof began to sag, when rainwater pooled on the dirt floor beneath their feet. At night, they heard voices outside calling their names, each man's voice perfectly imitated by something in the fog. When they responded, the answer came from behind them instead of ahead. Marcus began speaking to the empty chair by the fire. He called it Elias, as though his old friend had simply gone quiet, not vanished. Sometimes he laughed, other times he cried without sound. When thunder rolled through the valley, the cabin shook, the fire flickered. A figure appeared at the window, broad-shouldered, head bowed. The men froze, watching it stare back with eyes they recognized. It was Samuel, or what was left of him. His face was calm, almost peaceful, his breath fogging the glass. He raised a hand and pressed it against the window pane, leaving no mark at all. The men didn't open the door. They couldn't. By dawn, the figure was gone, and the fog had thinned, but the air inside felt colder, like something sacred had been stolen from them overnight. Marcus stopped eating. He spent hours standing in the doorway, staring into the distance. "They want us to listen," he said. "That's all they ever wanted." No one dared to answer. Soon the walls began to whisper back. The carvings Samuel had made seemed to shift, forming words no one remembered writing. Phrases appeared overnight, pleas, warnings, and once a name none of them knew. The fire went out one evening and refused to relight. Every attempt ended in smoke and failure. It was as if the house itself had decided the light had stayed long enough. Darkness brought calm at first, then confusion. Without fire, the men lost track of hours. The line between sleep and waking vanished. They began to see things moving inside the shadows. Marcus kept muttering about the other side, about doors that were not doors, and a voice that promised rest. "They're waiting," he whispered. "And when the last of us listens, we'll understand." One by one, the others stopped resisting. Some walked into the woods and never came back. Others simply lay down beside the cold hearth, eyes open, waiting for something unseen to claim them. Marcus was the last. He stood in the doorway for a long time, the fog curling around his boots like smoke. "We stayed too long," he said softly, "and now the silence remembers." When dawn came, the cabin was empty. The fire pit was cold, the tools untouched. The fog lifted, revealing only footprints leading toward the trees, ending abruptly where the earth turned soft. Travelers passing through the valley now find the place unsettlingly quiet. They say the air feels heavier there, and sometimes they hear voices, deep, weary, calling out for men long dead. Those who linger swear the ground hums beneath their feet, faint but rhythmic, like the echo of a heart still beating beneath the soil. The silence there isn't absence, it's memory made flesh. Even now, hunters claim that when the wind shifts, they hear the same phrase whispered through the trees. "Still here," and every man who hears it feels for a moment terribly known. The valley endures, the cabin rots, but the silence remains alive, feeding on the echoes of men who mistook endurance for strength and learned too late that silence never truly keeps its secrets. Those who study the place say it's haunted. Those who understand say it's not haunted enough, because what lingers there isn't vengeance. It's waiting, a promise unfulfilled, a lesson left unfinished. And when night falls across those hollow hills, the wind carries a faint voice, a man's voice, ancient and tired, murmuring the final truth they all refuse to face. The silence always answers. Morning broke without light, just a gray smear over the horizon that looked more like the end of something than its beginning. The cabin stood motionless, its windows dark and watchful. No one had lived there for years, or so the nearby townsmen believed. Yet sometimes, when the wind came from the ridge, faint voices seemed to drift down, low and heavy with memory. Rumors drew strangers to the valley. Researchers, investigators, wanderers chasing stories of the Brotherhood that vanished into silence. They came with notebooks, cameras, and questions no one wanted to answer. The first to arrive was Dr. Cole, a man with steady hands and sleepless eyes. He came not for legend, but for evidence, convinced there was a reason beneath the superstition. He studied the land like a battlefield archaeologist, searching for patterns in decay. Bones beneath the soil, symbols etched into trees, ashes that refused to scatter in the wind. At night, he camped near the cabin, though he never crossed the threshold. The walls seemed to breathe, and the floor inside groaned like something alive, shifting in uneasy sleep. He wrote in his journal that the place felt aware, not haunted, not cursed, simply awake in ways that human reason could not measure. Still, he stayed, drawn to the silence like a moth to flame. Days passed without incident until one morning he found prints in the mud. Bare footprints, wide and heavy, leading from the woods straight to the cabin's door, then vanishing into shadow. Cole followed them, heart thudding. The prints stopped abruptly at the step, as if the man who made them had simply ceased to exist. The door was open, swaying slightly in the wind. Inside, dust hung in the air like mist. On the far wall, beneath carvings and scratches, someone had written in charcoal, "Blood remembers what men forget." He traced the words without breathing. He noted that every mark on the wall was made by hand, yet none shared the same height. Some lines were made by men much taller than any alive today, others by hands too small to be adult. That night he dreamed of the men who once lived there. Broad-shouldered figures gathered by the fire, faces hidden in flickering light, eyes hollow but knowing. They spoke in unison, yet without sound. He woke to find his lantern extinguished and the cabin door open. Outside, fog rolled through the valley, curling around his tent like smoke. Somewhere within it, he heard the slow rhythm of footsteps. Cole called out, his voice sharp and trembling. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it rang in his ears like pressure at the bottom of the sea. He retreated inside and barred the door. But the silence didn't lift. It pressed closer, settling over him, through him, until even the sound of his heartbeat seemed to fade. When dawn came, the fog had thinned. But something felt changed. The carvings on the wall had shifted, rearranging themselves into new words. "He joins us." His hands shook as he read them. Cole left that day but returned a week later with two companions, men of science like himself, skeptical but curious. They brought instruments, cameras, and a generator to bring light back into the cabin. They mapped every inch, photographed every symbol. But when the film developed, each image showed only darkness. No carvings, no furniture, no light. Just black, with faint outlines of men standing still. The assistants insisted they hadn't seen anyone inside, but Cole's face paled. He recognized one of the shapes. It was himself, standing by the fireplace, staring into the lens with eyes he didn't remember using. He began to hear whispers again that night, faint but persistent. They came from beneath the floorboards, from the cracks in the walls, from his own reflection in the window pane. The others grew restless. One packed and left before sunrise. The other vanished after going to fetch water. His boots were found at the edge of the creek, still upright as if he'd simply stepped out of them. Cole continued alone, scribbling frantic notes about resonant echoes and male lineage distortion. He wrote that the men who once lived here were still present, bound by blood, trapped by memory. He believed their silence was deliberate, a form of preservation. "They are not gone," he wrote. "They are folded into the space between sound and time, sustained by repetition." Sleep abandoned him. His hands grew unsteady, his words slanted. He began carving names into the wall beside the old ones, his own among them, again and again, smaller each time. Villagers from the valley reported seeing lights flicker from the ridge at night. Some claimed to hear chanting carried on the wind, deep and rhythmic, like the echo of hearts beating underground. When searchers finally came weeks later, they found the cabin empty again. Cole's journal lay open on the table, its final entry written in trembling strokes. I am beginning to understand the blood. The pages before it were filled with diagrams of faces, strong, bearded men whose features blurred together until individuality disappeared. Across the last sketch he'd written, "It's all the same man." Outside, the graves looked freshly disturbed. The soil was soft, as if recently turned. Yet no one could find tools or signs of digging, only a single bare footprint leading toward the woods. The investigators sealed the cabin, nailed the door shut, and posted warnings. Still, locals say that if you pass near the ridge at dusk, you can hear hammering inside, steady and deliberate. They call it the men rebuilding. Some claim the air there feels charged, humming faintly like a living current beneath the skin. The silence, they say, listens back. In town, Cole's notes were archived under unsolved anthropological anomaly. Scholars dismissed them as delusion, the product of isolation. Yet none could explain the recordings he left behind. On those tapes, a dozen voices speak in unison, deep, tired, unmistakably male, reciting words too faint to fully decipher. The only clear phrase repeats again and again. We are still building. The cabin still stands, though no one dares enter. The air around it tastes of iron, and the ground seems to breathe beneath your boots. Birds refuse to sing there as if language itself offends the place. Some nights, when the moon is thin, the fog gathers again. Through it, figures can be seen, men working silently, carrying wood, mending walls, repairing what cannot be fixed. Those who watch too long feel dizzy, as though their own names are slipping away, replaced by something older, heavier, carved into their bones without permission. No one stays after dark. The silence that follows is thicker than shadow, a silence that hums faintly, like breath shared between centuries of the same unbroken line. By morning, the fog clears. The cabin stands still, its door closed, its windows blind. But on the step lies fresh mud, shaped into a perfect footprint, too large to belong to any living man. And though the world above may forget, the ridge remembers. It holds their echoes like a vow, unending and patient. The bloodline never died. It merely learned how to hide. Those who pass through the valley whisper the same warning to every traveler. Don't listen too closely. The silence speaks. And somewhere within it, the blood still hums its ancient name. The ridge was quiet again, though quiet in that valley never meant peace. It meant watching, waiting, listening to the breath of something older than memory. The men were gone, yet not forgotten. Their cabin sagged beneath moss and rot, its roof torn open like a wound that refused to heal. Still, beneath the decay, a pulse remained, a faint vibration running through every board and stone. Travelers rarely came this way anymore. Those who did spoke of the strange pull the place held, like gravity thickened around it. Even silence felt heavier there, reluctant to leave. One traveler was Daniel, a surveyor sent by the county to map the old land for a new road. He'd heard the stories, dismissed them as superstition, but the closer he came, the slower his steps grew. He reached the ridge at dusk. The sun fell behind the hills like a dying ember, and the woods exhaled a chill that crept beneath his coat. The air smelled faintly of smoke. The cabin appeared through the trees, broken, skeletal, yet unmistakably alive. The door hung open just enough to suggest invitation or warning. Daniel hesitated, then stepped forward, crunching through the wet leaves. Inside, he found carvings on every surface. Names, dates, symbols spiraling into each other until they formed a single endless loop. The mark seemed freshly made, though dust covered everything else. The fireplace was cold, but ash lay scattered on the floor as if someone had stirred it recently. He knelt, touched the soot, and felt warmth still clinging faintly beneath the surface. He whispered a greeting to no one, half in jest, half in respect. The room responded with a sound he couldn't place. Not echo, not wind, something between the two. Daniel set up camp inside, convincing himself it was only for the night. But when morning came, he woke to find the light unchanged. It was as though dawn had forgotten him. He checked his watch. It had stopped ticking. Outside, the forest was still. No birds, no insects, just the steady hum of unseen presence pressing from every direction. He tried to leave by midday, but each path led him back to the same clearing. The house always waited at the center, like a mirror refusing to let his reflection go. By the third day, he stopped fighting. He began exploring the interior, taking notes on the carvings. Some he recognized as initials, others as fragments of words too old to belong to this century. He found a cracked mirror propped against the far wall, its surface streaked with soot. When he wiped it clean, he saw not his own face but the faint outline of another man standing behind him. He spun, but the room was empty. The air carried a faint whisper, his own voice repeating, "Still here," though he hadn't spoken. He sat down, gripping his knees until the tremor passed. That night, he dreamed of a circle of men around a dying fire, their faces hidden in shadow. They hummed in low tones, their rhythm matching the pulse of his heartbeat. When he woke, he found soot smeared across his hands and the words, "Join us," scrawled on the floor beside his bedroll. The letters were wet, the ash still warm. Daniel began recording his observations. His handwriting grew uneven, his notes more frantic. "The house remembers," he wrote. "It holds its men the way earth holds bone, tight, unwilling to release." Days blurred. He lost count of how long he'd been there. His reflection in the mirror began to change. Eyes darker, shoulders broader, features unfamiliar but not unfriendly. One afternoon, he heard hammering outside. Through the window, he saw men working silently among the trees, their backs bent, faces unseen. They were building something he couldn't quite make out. He called to them, but they didn't respond. When he stepped outside, they were gone, leaving only footprints that sank slowly back into the earth as if the ground was swallowing them. He felt no fear, only recognition. Their silence was the same silence that lived inside him now, vast and heavy but strangely comforting. It no longer felt empty. It felt shared. He began carving his own name into the wall beside the others, his knife steady, his breath calm. Each letter felt like a heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the place. At dusk, fog rolled through the trees again. It glowed faintly, lit from within by something unseen. The forest moved like lungs expanding, drawing him closer to its center. Daniel followed without thought. The path curved through the mist until it led to a clearing where dozens of men stood in stillness, faces turned upward, eyes closed. They looked carved from shadow and smoke, solid yet transparent. Each figure exhaled in unison, the sound deep and resonant, vibrating through the soil beneath his boots. He stepped forward. None turned to acknowledge him, but the air thickened, as if welcoming him home. He felt his heartbeat slow, his breath matching theirs, steady and eternal. The tallest of the figures raised a hand, gesturing toward the cabin. Daniel looked back and saw it burning, not with flame, but with light so bright it seemed to hum. He understood then. The house wasn't a trap. It was a vessel, built to contain what could not die, the memory of men who had become echoes of themselves, folded into the land. He returned to the clearing, but the figures were gone. Only the sound remained, a deep, rhythmic pulse that followed him as he walked back to the cabin's glowing frame. Inside, the mirror waited. His reflection no longer frightened him. It was not another man now. It was many men, layered through time, all looking back with the same calm understanding. He reached out and touched the glass. It rippled beneath his fingertips, warm like skin. The pulse quickened, then steadied, matching his own heart again. When the light faded, only the carvings remained. His name was among them, carved deeper than the rest, fresh and precise, as if it had always been there waiting. Travelers who pass the ridge now speak of a new man seen near the cabin, a quiet figure walking the woods at dusk, humming softly, his eyes reflecting the fire of twilight. They say he never speaks, only listens. They say the forest bends around him like a curtain, letting him move between shadows untouched. No one knows his name. Some call him the Watcher, others the Keeper. But those who've stood near the cabin long enough swear they've heard him whisper a single phrase: "We are still building." The mirror still hangs on the wall, though no one remembers placing it there. It reflects only the forest now, endless rows of trees that shift subtly as if breathing in unison. When the wind rises, the trees hum softly, deep and steady, carrying the memory of the men who became part of the land they refused to leave. And when night falls, the ridge glows faintly under the moon, a heartbeat in the wilderness, eternal and unbroken. The Brotherhood remains, not in flesh, but in silence that speaks without words. Those who hear it know better than to stay. They turn back, hearts pounding, feeling the echo follow them down the hill like a promise kept by something older than time. The ridge remembers every step, every name, every vow whispered in fear or faith. The bloodline is gone, but its echo endures, an inheritance carved into the bones of the earth itself. When the wind finally dies, the valley exhales one last time. The words drift through the trees, low and steady, spoken in 100 forgotten voices. We stayed because we must.